Hello, everyone. It's Miss Madison, and I'm coming with you today, continuing our lesson on Earth and space. And today we're going to focus on stars and constellations. Last week we learned about the formation of stars, and we also talked about the life cycle of a star. And I gave you some information to complete in last week's video with a graphic organizer explaining to show that your understanding of a small to medium sized life cycle of a star as well as a massive life cycle of a star. And I'm looking forward to just getting that information from you all. This week, we're still going to talk about stars, but we're going to talk about something in particular with stars, and that is constellation. And so we'll get more into what is a constellation as we continue on our lesson today. Our standards that we will be focusing on is E5ESS 1.4. Explain the cause and effect relationship between the positions of the sun, earth, and moon and resulting eclipse, positions of constellations, and appearance of the moon. 5ESS 1.6. Use tools and describe how stars and constellations appear to move from the earth perspective throughout the seasons. So to hone in on a particular aspect of this standard, I sort of had to pull it apart so that we can focus on constellations. So our learning target for today is I can explain the cause and effect relationship between the position of Earth and position of constellations. I can use tools to describe how stars and constellations appear to move from the Earth perspective throughout the seasons. Now, this is everything that we need to know in this lesson in order to be successful, to show an understanding of the standard. We need to understand a cause and effect relationship. And as you learned in your reading classes, a cause is the why something happened, and the effect is the outcome of it. So there's a cause and effect relationship between the position of Earth and constellations. Also, position is where a particular thing stand or may be at a particular point. So we need to understand that as the earth may be at a particular point, it will have a effect on the constellations in which we see. Also, Earth. We know that Earth is the third planet from the sun. So, and that is the planet where we live. We call it, that's our habitat. Also, constellations. Constellations are a part of stars, but we're going to get to that when we get to our vocabulary page. Also, as our second standard, and in that standard, we're going to explain, and as we used to talk about in class, explaining, we're going to go into detail about this particular task that is placed upon us, that we can explain it in detail, not just a quick answer, but to show our understanding of it, we're able to explain in detail. Our second standard target is that we're tools. And the tools that we use to look at the stars from Earth is a telescope. So we're not actually going to use a telescope in this lesson, but we do need to know that is the tool that we use in order to see stars in different constellations that are just beyond what our natural eye can see. Also, we know that stars are also made of energy and how they formulate together, and they give off energy of heat and light. And constellations, as we said earlier, we're going to know that is a part of stars, and we'll get clarity on that as we continue on. Now, Earth perspective is almost like point of view. Earth perspective is you're here on Earth, and when you look, it's from Earth perspective on how you see things. So that is what we mean by Earth perspective, how things appear to us from Earth. So it's like your point of view is from Earth's point of view, from our point of view here on Earth. And of course, seasons. We know that we have 4 seasons, and the seasons that we're in right now is spring. And as you know, June 23rd, we'll be pushing into our summer solstice, and that starts on June 23rd. So we have spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Those are our 4 seasons, and we're going to be able to see how, as Earth continues its orbit around the sun, which we call the revolution, which is 365 days and a quarter, how that affects the constellations that we see. So we do need to know revolution and know that is the Earth orbit around the sun, as we learned in our second lesson that was taught in our science. Also, we need to know rotation. The Earth rotates. The Earth is slanted on an axis in 23.5 degrees, and it spins on this axis, and that's what gives us day and night. And the spinning on the axis of day and night will position us in space where we will see different stars, and depending on what season that we're in, as we're spinning on our axis, we become exposed to different types of stars and also constellations. Okay, so you will be assessed in this lesson with a cool video. There will be a question for a cool video just to make sure that you engage and paying attention as we're learning about constellation. Also, you'll have some text-dependent questions that will go along with the text that we are reading. And there will be a check for understanding. Just questions for you just to make sure that you're understanding constellations and that you're understanding the learning targets and how the information that you learn is all coming together to help you understand the cause and effect, the relationship between the position of Earth and the constellation. And we will have an exit ticket at the end. All right, so as I said, we're going to focus on our vocabulary to understand constellation. And this is the same vocabulary that we saw last week when we were learning about the life cycle of a star. But this week, we're just going to focus on two of those vocabulary words. And the first one is star, an object in space that produces its own energy, including heat and light. And also constellation. Constellation is any other patterns that are formed by a group of stars in the night sky. So that's why we're learning about stars, but then constellations is when stars come together and they're able to form a group. And we'll see how constellations get their names and where they get their names from here in this lesson. So those are the two vocabulary words that we'll focus on in this lesson. And just for you to remember that revolution and the Earth orbit around the sun also is coming to play. And also just remember that when you see the word rotate in this lesson, that is the Earth spinning on its axis in 24-hour time frame, which gives us day and night. Now here's our anchor chart for constellations. As you see, they're sort of connected like a dot to dot, that you connect the stars together like dot to dot and see what it makes. So it says here, a constellation is a group of stars that form a shape or pattern when viewed from Earth. Most constellations can only be seen during certain times of the year, depending on the Earth position. There it goes, pulling from our standard again, as well as our learning target of the Earth. All right, so the type of stars that we're able to see in constellations that we're able to see in the night sky is from Earth perspective, depending on the season that we're in and if Earth rotates on this axis. All right, so now we're going to take time out for a cool video. A cool video. All right, so let's gather up into this video.
Oh, hey guys! It's just gotten dark here, so we're spending a little time before bed looking at the night sky. And sometimes we like to look up at the stars and make up funny stories about the things that we see. Have you ever looked up at the clouds during the day and thought about what they looked like? A duck, an alligator, a shark, or even a bear? Well, people do the same thing with the stars, and they've done so for thousands of years. I'm sure you've noticed on a nice clear night how there are so many stars in the sky, more than you can probably count. Some stars look brighter to us than others, and the darker it is where you live, like if you're really far from the lights of a city, the more stars you can see. And for a long time, people have seen pictures among certain groups of stars, just like connect the dots. These groups of stars are sometimes called constellations, and scientists still use the names of these constellations to describe different parts of the night sky. Probably the most famous group of stars that's easiest to find is the Big Dipper. If you live in the northern hemisphere, you can spot it pretty easily in the northern part of the sky. It's made of 7 bright stars, and if you connect the dots of those stars, you'll see a big, squarish bowl with a really long handle sticking out of it. In the United States, some people thought the stars looked like a big ladle or spoon, so they called it the Big Dipper. But just like the fluffy clouds we were talking about, groups of stars can look different to different people. In Great Britain, for example, the same 7 stars are called the Plough because they were thought to look like a farmer's plow. And people in Germany thought it looked like a wagon. And those same stars also reminded lots of ancient people of a giant bear. Scientists today consider the Big Dipper to be part of a bigger constellation that they call Ursa Major, for Great Bear. The Big Dipper is easiest to find in the summer when it's higher in the sky. But in the winter, you should look for another famous constellation, Orion. The first part that you'll probably see are the 3 bright stars in a row. In ancient Greece, stargazers thought that they looked like the belt of a great hunter. They thought the 2 bright stars above it would be where his shoulders were, and the 2 stars below it, his legs. The more people looked, the more other things they saw. And if you use your imagination and follow the stars from one of his shoulders, you can see another group of stars, like he's holding on to something, like a shield. And what are those fuzzy lights hanging from his belt? Oh, kind of looks like a sword. There's a lot more to Orion than just a few stars. That's why when astronomers talk about constellations, they don't just mean the few stars that might look like something. They also mean all of the other stuff in that part of the night sky. So part of what gives Orion's sword its fuzzy brightness is a distant cloud of gas and dust called the Orion Nebula. That's part of the Orion constellation too. So what if you live in the southern hemisphere? Then keep your eyes open for the Crux, the smallest of the constellations. It's still pretty easy to find, especially in the winter, because of the 4 bright stars that make a cross, which is what its name means. The southern hemisphere is also a great place to find Sagittarius, a constellation that reminded ancient Greeks of a creature that was part man, part horse, shooting an arrow. For most people, the easiest way to find it is to look for the 8 stars that make this shape. To me, it looks more like a teapot, but that's why it's fun to make up stories. So the next time that you're outside and it's dark, look up and see if you can find any of these constellations or other groups of stars. Or you could just make up your own. Okay, Squeaks, let's find something that looks like a rat. See you next time on SciShow Kids.
All right, did you enjoy that cool video? And what constellation can be seen in the northern hemisphere during the summer? Ah, you're right. It is the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper can be seen from the Earth perspective from the northern hemisphere during the summer. And if the Earth continue its orbit around the sun in the wintertime, we're able to see Orion. All right, so here are some questions that we're getting ready to get into our text reading. And so some questions I just want to give you just to check to make sure that you're understanding the information that we'll be reading. How have constellations have travelers in earlier times? Can constellations visible in the northern hemisphere be seen in the southern hemisphere? And I want you to make sure that you explain your answer using evidence from the text, because we always support the information that we write with evidence. What causes different stars to appear to move across the sky? And our last question, what effect does the Earth revolution have on stars' movement? All right, so after looking at that, we are now ready to get into our text reading, where we'll be reading about constellations. All right, hold on, give me one moment. All right, so let's get into our reading, constellations.
Constellations. When people in ancient cultures looked at the night sky, they saw patterns in the stars. These patterns are called constellations. They were named after animals, fictional characters, or objects. Star patterns have been useful to ancient and modern travelers. For example, if you can see either the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper in the night sky, you can use them to easily find Polaris, the North Star. If you travel in the direction of Polaris, you will be moving north. The ancient Greeks divided the sky into 12 sections and named some constellations after characters from Greek myths, such as the hunter Orion and the hero Hercules. The ancient Chinese divided the sky into 4 major regions. The name of each region included a color, an animal, and a direction. For example, the western region was called the White Tiger of the West. Today, astronomers divide the sky into 88 constellations. Many of the ancient names for constellations are still used today. Modern astronomers have named constellations visible in the southern hemisphere, which could not be seen by ancient Greeks and Romans. Skill Builder, read a diagram. To find Polaris, first find the stars in the bowl of the Big Dipper.
All right. And so actually we have a chart showing the Big Dipper, which we will see in the summer during the northern hemisphere. And as we can see, the tip of the Big Dipper goes straight up to Polaris, the North Star, and that starts the beginning handle of the Little Dipper. Remember those check for understanding questions that were given that you should be answering during this time. Here we go with our second page.
Apparent motion. The stars in the northern sky seem to circle around Polaris. The stars appear to move because of Earth's rotation. Although the stars appear to change position, their positions within constellations do not change. As Earth revolves around the Sun, different constellations are visible to an observer on Earth. For example, Orion is a winter constellation in the northern hemisphere. It can be seen rising in the eastern sky on winter evenings. As the season changes, Orion sets earlier and earlier each night. In May, Orion disappears from the night sky in the northern hemisphere. In June, the constellation Scorpius, the scorpion, becomes visible. These seasonal changes are caused by Earth's orbit around the Sun. Each night, the position of most stars shifts slightly to the west. Soon the stars once visible in the west cannot be seen, and other stars appear in the east. Word study. The word circumpolar comes from 2 words. Circum means around, and polar means of the poles. A star map shows the locations of constellations in the night sky.
And here we have Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, Draco, Cephalus, and let's go back to review our text-dependent questions. All right, here they are again. How have constellations helped travelers in earlier times? Can constellations visible in the northern hemisphere be seen in the southern hemisphere? Explain your answers using evidence from the text. What causes different stars to appear to move across the sky? And last, what effect does the Earth revolution have on stars' movement? Now remember, as we are answering test-dependent questions, we always want to go back and look in the text for the answers, as you will need evidence from the test to support each and every one of your answers. So make sure you go back, once again, as you're doing your answers, to look in the text for the answer for your test-dependent question. And now we're going to continue on in our study as we're going to read another article about constellations. And here are 7 questions I would like for you to answer as a part of independent practice, just checking for your understanding of the information that we've learned and that you will be learning from this other text. Our question number 1. Which of the following sentences is true? A, the passage is fiction. B, the information in this passage is imaginary. C, the passage is not fiction. D, both A and C. 2, mythology is the study of heavenly bodies. B, the legends and stories from long ago. C, the visible stars on a clear, dark night. And D, none of these. 3, the purpose of this passage was A, to persuade, B, to entertain, C, to inform, D, none of these. 4, navigators and early explorers used constellations to A, enjoy the night sky, B, write legends and stories, C, to find their locations, and D, to revolve around the sun. 5, constellations, A, are imaginary, B, are groups of stars, C, are groups of navigators and farmers, D, both A and C. 6, people from early cultures named constellations, A, for animals in their mythology, B, for villains in their mythology, C, for heroes in their mythology, or D, all of these. 7, farmers use constellations, A, to know when to plant and harvest their crops, B, to write stories about heroes, C, to determine their location, D, none of these. All right, our title of our text is What Are Constellations? The sky is full of stars. Constellations are groupings of stars. Constellations help to visually break the night sky into smaller pieces. The stars in a constellation may not actually be close together, but they can appear to form a pattern when viewed from Earth, and that is Earth perspective. Stars were grouped into constellations by the early Greeks as well as by early cultures. These constellations were often named after characters from mythology. Many of the constellations were named after animals, heroes, and even villains from these legends of long ago. Astronomers, or people who study the heavenly bodies, divided the stars into 88 official constellations. These constellations form a kind of map of the sky, helping us to understand the placement of planets and other celestial bodies. Farmers have historically used constellations to help them determine when they should plant and harvest their crops. Some constellations can be seen only during certain times of the year. By watching and waiting for these constellations, farmers were able to determine the arrival of spring long before the existence of calendars. Navigators and early explorers used constellations to help them determine their location during their exploration. The part of the sky we see at night changes as the Earth rotates. People looking at the night sky in different locations see stars and constellations differently. Even when they had no landmarks and were traveling without maps, early travelers could figure out where they were just by looking at the sky. Learning about the night sky is fun and interesting. Look for the Big Dipper, Orion, or any of the other larger constellations on the next clear night. And you'll be looking at the same thing that curious people have been looking at for centuries. All right, our questions again, just for your review. Take a moment to answer these questions and make sure that you write the title of the test at the top of your page so that when I'm checking it, I will be aligned with what you're actually doing. I want you to make sure that you email me your questions and answers from your check for understanding and also from this independent practice that you're doing. Email me at Madison, rg@scsk12.org. That's MADISONRG@scsk12.org or in Classroom Dojo. And now that brings us to our exit ticket. As we've been learning about stars and constellations, let's see how well you pull this together. Constellations are stars that seem grouped together in the night sky. Each group seems to move as a unit as Earth moves. And once again, we know that's dealing with Earth revolution and rotation. Some constellations can be seen every season. Others can be seen during some seasons. The table below shows some constellations can be seen in the United States. The table below shows when some constellations can be seen in the United States. Here we are, some constellations and their seasons. So here we have the name of the constellation, and then we have the seasons, winter, spring, summer, autumn, and that we are able to see by looking at this chart when actually this constellation will appear for us to see here on Earth. Question 1, which constellation can be seen in July? Which constellations can be seen in July? And question 2, which constellation can be seen in January? Although these are giving us the months of the year, we should be able to associate them with the correct season. Once again, answer that as a ticket, send it to me so that you can get what your kudos, your thumbs up for doing this work, just to keep yourself knowledgeable of the standards that we've learned during the school year. All right, so as a point of our reflection and closure, we know that constellation is a group of stars that form a particular pattern in the sky, and that we know that the Earth position plays a part in what constellations we would see. I want you to take time out, as I said in the video, on a clear night, go out and see, can you see some constellations in the sky? And if you don't know the name, what shape does it make to you? What does it look like? I also want to give a shout out to Darshan Henderson and Skylar for just submitting to me their work from the lesson. I love you and miss you all. Be safe and stay healthy. Bye.